A food truck is just so embarrassing for this family. My sister laughed, swirling her expensive wine, as if my entire life was a pathetic joke. Dad is so disappointed you are still flipping burgers in a metal box on the side of the road. I just smiled, my hand resting on my designer bag that held the latest issue of Forbes magazine with my face on the cover. I knew that in exactly 5 minutes, their condescending laughter would turn into absolute panic. My name is Lauren, 33 years old, and the CEO of the fastest growing restaurant chain in the country. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your dreams mocked by the very people who should have supported you most. Growing up in our affluent Chicago suburb, success was the only currency my parents recognized. Tonight was our annual Christmas dinner, hosted at my parents' sprawling estate. The dining room was a showcase of wealth with a massive crystal chandelier, casting a warm glow over fine china and silver cutlery. The table groaned under the weight of an elaborate holiday feast, but the atmosphere was as cold as the winter wind outside. Sitting across from me was my younger sister Allison, the undisputed golden child. At 30 years old, she worked as a luxury real estate agent and never missed a chance to remind everyone of her high-profile listings. Beside her sat her husband, DeAndre, a 34-year-old investment banker. DeAndre wore a custom-tailored suit to a family dinner, an intentional choice to project his elite status. Allison took a delicate bite of her roast beef before directing her attention back to me. Her eyes sparkled with that familiar, malicious joy she always displayed when tearing me down. "I just do not understand your lack of ambition, Lauren," she continued, her voice projecting clearly across the long table. "You are 33 years old. Do you really plan to spend the rest of your life smelling like cooking oil and exhaust fumes? It is cute for a summer project in your 20s, but as a career it is just embarrassing. What do you even do when it rains? Do you stand outside with an umbrella handing out tacos?" The condescension in her voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. She looked around the table, seeking the validation she was so used to receiving. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, taking a slow sip of my water. I had learned long ago that reacting emotionally only fueled their cruelty. DeAndre chuckled, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He leaned back in his chair with the unearned arrogance of a man who believed his net worth dictated his human worth. "You have to admit, Lauren, it is a tough look," he said smoothly. "The blue-collar struggle is real, but at some point you have to grow up and enter the real world. In my line of work, we deal with actual capital. We manage portfolios, secure massive acquisitions, and move markets. We create real wealth. I just cannot imagine waking up every morning to scrub a griddle. It lacks vision." He swirled his wine, holding the glass up to the light. "But hey, society needs people to serve us lunch when we step out of the boardroom, right?" My mother Diane chimed in right on cue. She reached over and patted DeAndre on the arm, her face beaming with absolute adoration. "DeAndre is absolutely right, Lauren. You really should listen to him. He and Allison are building a real empire. They understand how the modern world works. You know, Mrs. Henderson at the country club asked me what you were doing these days. Do you know how humiliating it is to tell my friends that my eldest daughter operates a food cart? I had to tell her you were exploring culinary management just to save face. Why can you not be more like your sister? Allison has closed 3 commercial properties this quarter alone. She is building a legacy while you are serving street food to drunken college students at midnight." My father Howard nodded solemnly from the head of the table. He set down his fork and gave me the exact same look of profound disappointment he had been giving me since I was a teenager. "It is a matter of prestige, Lauren," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "We raised you to achieve greatness. We provided you with every opportunity. Seeing you squander your potential on a mobile kitchen is deeply troubling. DeAndre is operating at the highest levels of corporate finance. Allison is securing premium real estate. They are moving forward. You are stagnating. You need to abandon this little hobby and find a respectable corporate position. Perhaps DeAndre could find a low-level administrative role for you at his firm. It would not pay much initially, but it would at least be a respectable start. I looked at the four of them, a unified front of arrogance and misplaced superiority. They sat there in their designer clothes eating expensive food in a paid-off mansion, completely convinced of their own supremacy. They thought I was struggling. They thought I was barely scraping by counting pennies from a cash register at the end of a long, greasy day. They had absolutely no idea that my supposed little hobby had expanded into a massive corporate entity. They did not know about the franchise locations, the national supply chain contracts, or the aggressive expansion strategy that had Wall Street analysts buzzing for months. I did not say a single word in my defense. I just let them keep talking, letting them dig their graves deeper and deeper with every smug comment and every arrogant laugh. The incoming truth would shatter their entire fragile reality. My mother took a delicate sip of her wine, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me from across the table. She placed her glass down with a sharp clink that echoed in the quiet dining room. "You are being incredibly selfish, Lauren," she said, her voice dropping into that familiar, disappointed octave she reserved exclusively for me. "You sit there completely silent while we offer you genuine advice. We are trying to protect the family image. Do you have any idea how much pressure your father and I are under to maintain our standing in this community? We have board meetings, charity galas, and social obligations. We cannot have people whispering about our eldest daughter struggling in the service industry. You need to get a real corporate job. You need to put on a suit, go to a real office, and start contributing to the prestige of this family instead of dragging it down." I placed my napkin on the table, my movements deliberately slow and calm. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, feeling the years of suppressed anger finally rising to the surface. "A real job." I repeated, my voice steady, but laced with ice. "You mean like the culinary school fund you drained to pay for Allison's destination wedding in Cabo?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that sucked the oxygen right out of the room. My mother's face flushed a deep, blotchy red, her pristine facade cracking instantly. Beside her, my father stiffened, his fork clattering against his porcelain plate. Allison gasped, her hand flying to her chest in mock outrage, while DeAndre suddenly looked very interested in his steak. "How dare you bring that up tonight?" my father boomed, his authoritative tone, failing to mask the sudden panic in his eyes. "That was a family financial decision made years ago. We did what we had to do." "You stole my college fund, Dad," I corrected him, refusing to let him soften the truth. "Grandma Rose set up that account specifically for my culinary education. You and Mom were the trustees. You emptied it the month before I was supposed to enroll just so Allison could have ice sculptures and a private beach resort for her wedding. It was a loan," my mother shrieked, abandoning her refined country club persona completely. "We always intended to pay it back. Furthermore, Allison needed that wedding. She was marrying DeAndre. She was entering an elite social circle. We had to make the right impression. Your little cooking classes could wait. A wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event that establishes a couple status." Allison nodded vigorously, sensing her mother's support. "Exactly, Lauren. DeAndre colleagues were flying in from Wall Street. We could not just host a cheap reception in a local hotel hall. We needed to project success. Your culinary school was a gamble anyway. The restaurant industry has a high failure rate. Mom and Dad made a sound investment in my future instead of throwing money away on a pipe dream." "A sound investment," I echoed, staring at my sister. "You call stealing $75,000 from your own sister a sound investment?" DeAndre cleared his throat, attempting to play the role of the rational peacemaker while looking incredibly smug. "Listen, Lauren," he said, using his best boardroom voice. "We understand you are still bitter about the past, but in the world of high finance capital, allocation is about maximizing returns. Your parents looked at the available resources and allocated them where they would generate the most social and networking value. My network provided your father with 3 major client leads last year alone. That wedding paid for itself in social equity. You have to look at the bigger picture instead of holding on to petty childhood grievances." I looked at DeAndre, marveling at his sheer audacity. He was sitting there eating food my mother prepared in a house my father paid for, justifying the theft of my education fund with corporate buzzwords. "There is nothing petty about it, DeAndre," I replied smoothly. "It was theft, plain and simple. And the fact that you all sit here trying to dress it up as capital allocation just proves how morally bankrupt this entire family really is." My mother slammed her hands on the table. "Do not speak to your brother-in-law that way. He is offering you a masterclass in how the real world operates. You should be taking notes. We gave you life, Lauren. We fed you, clothed you, and housed you for 18 years. If we needed to redirect some funds to ensure your sister's happiness and secure our family's social standing, then that was our right as your parents. You are incredibly ungrateful. You always have been. You focus on what you did not get instead of appreciating what we did for you." At the far end of the table, Grandma Rose sat quietly. She was 78 years old, sharp as a tack, and the only person in this room who had ever shown me an ounce of genuine love. She had been the one to slip me $5,000 in secret when she found out my parents had drained my trust. That $5,000 bought my first rusted, beat-up food truck. I caught her eye and she gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She knew what I was about to do and she was waiting for the fireworks. My father pointed a commanding finger at me. "I demand an apology, Lauren. Right now. You will apologize to your mother, you will apologize to Allison, and you will certainly apologize to DeAndre for your disrespectful tone. We invited you into our home for the holidays, out of the goodness of our hearts, hoping you had finally matured. Instead, you sit here attacking us, wallowing in the past, and refusing to take responsibility for your stagnant career. You will remain a bitter cook." I stared at my father, letting his harsh words hang in the air. Instead of apologizing or shrinking back into my subservient role, I simply smiled. That unsettled him. He shifted his weight and looked toward his favorite son-in-law for backup. DeAndre was happy to oblige. DeAndre rested his elbows on the imported tablecloth, looking at me with extreme arrogance. He adjusted his custom suit jacket. "Lauren, let us be completely honest," he began, his voice dripping with thick condescension. "You operate on a micro level. I deal with macroeconomic shifts. My firm manages a massive portfolio. Just last week, I oversaw a liquidity event generating more revenue in one afternoon than your food truck will see in 10 lifetimes. It is about leverage and risk management. You play in the sandbox while we build skyscrapers. You should be asking me for direct financial mentorship, not insulting the highly successful people who graciously tolerate your presence at this holiday table." Allison nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. DeAndre and I are leveraging capital to build a legacy with commercial contractors and huge bank loans. You trade time for pennies. It is depressing to watch you pretend you are on our level. You should have a retirement account by now instead of a rusted-out vehicle." My mother sighed dramatically. "We just want you to be secure, Lauren. Is it so wrong for us to want you to have a normal, respectable life?" The sheer delusion was intoxicating. I looked at DeAndre, noting the subtle sweat on his forehead, common for over-leveraged men projecting success. Then I looked at my parents, who had traded their daughter's future for an illusion of high society prestige. "I am not struggling, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of emotion. "In fact, I am doing exceptionally well." My father scoffed. "Please, do not insult our intelligence. You are barely scraping by." I reached down my fingers, finding the smooth leather handle of my custom tote bag. I unzipped the compartment, deliberately drawing out the suspense while Allison checked her nails. I pulled out a thick, glossy magazine and placed it face down on my lap. I looked up at the people who always made me feel small. "You are right about one thing, DeAndre," I said, maintaining direct eye contact. "It is about scale and leverage, but you are underestimating my sandbox." With a swift motion, I tossed the magazine onto the center of the dining table. It landed with a satisfying thud directly in front of my father. It was the newest unreleased issue of Forbes magazine. Dominating the entire glossy front cover was a high-definition portrait of my face. I was standing in front of my corporate headquarters projecting ruthless corporate authority. The bold gold lettering of the headline practically screamed off the page. The new culinary queen. How Urban Crave turned a food truck into a $300 million empire. The silence that slammed into the room was immediate, absolute, and utterly deafening. It was as if all the oxygen had been instantly vaporized. Clink! Grandma Rose dropped her heavy silver fork onto her fine china plate. The sharp sound echoed like a gunshot. I glanced over at her. She was leaning back, a wide, knowing smile spreading across her wrinkled face. She had known all along, having read the digital preview I sent her. My father stared at the magazine cover, his mouth slightly open, blinking rapidly. He leaned forward, hands trembling, as he gripped the table, reading the headline again and again. $300 million. The words seemed to short-circuit his brain. Diane let out a strange, choked gasp. She reached out with a shaking hand, her manicured fingers hovering over my face, too afraid to touch the glossy paper. 300 million, she whispered. That cannot be right. This is a fake. It is very real, Mom, I replied, taking a leisurely sip of wine. It hits newsstands nationwide tomorrow. I secured an advance copy just for this lovely family dinner. Allison's face drained of all color. Her spray tan looked incredibly orange against her stark white pallor. You own Urban Crave? She stammered, her voice cracking. The chain that just opened 15 new locations. The one that bought out the massive commercial block downtown. I nodded, offering her a sweet, condescending smile. Yes, Allison. That is what I do when it rains. I buy commercial blocks. I do not use an umbrella. I build buildings. I turned my attention to DeAndre. The smug, untouchable investment banker persona had completely vanished. He looked like a terrified man who had just stepped onto a hidden landmine. His jaw was clenched so tight, I thought his teeth might shatter. He stared at the Forbes logo, fully understanding the rigorous financial auditing required to make that specific cover. They do not print fake valuations or unverified assets. They verify every single revenue stream and corporate holding. He knew that absolute truth better than anyone else sitting in this dining room. So DeAndre, I continued mirroring his exact corporate arrogance while maintaining a completely calm demeanor. You were proudly talking about moving markets and securing massive capital funding. My company currently employs over 3,000 people nationwide across dozens of thriving locations. Our year-over-year revenue growth is sitting comfortably at 240%. I own 80% of the equity without any outside interference. Tell me once again about your increasingly fragile and highly unstable portfolio. Because from where I am sitting looking at my massive valuation, your little high-finance sandbox looks incredibly small. DeAndre swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing visibly. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no words came out. His legendary corporate bravado had evaporated into thin air, leaving behind a desperate man. The power dynamic in the room had permanently violently shifted. They were all suffocating under the crushing, undeniable weight of my immense success. The heavy silence stretched for another agonizing minute. No one moved. The glossy magazine cover stared back at them, a brilliant testament to everything they had ever mocked. My mother was the first to break the tension. Her hand flew to her chest, her posture instantly shifting from rigid disdain to a sickeningly sweet display of maternal pride. Oh my goodness, she cooed, her voice trembling with forced emotion. Lauren, my beautiful girl, I simply cannot believe it. $300 million. Why did you keep such a wonderful secret from your own mother? I just sat there. I did not blink. I watched her fake smile stretch across her face. My father cleared his throat with a loud booming sound. He sat up straight, adjusting his collar, and completely abandoned the angry, commanding patriarch persona he had worn just moments ago. He looked at me, not with the usual contempt, but with a sudden ravenous hunger. Well now, my father said, clapping his hands together. This certainly changes the complexion of the evening. I must say, Lauren, you have played your cards remarkably well. He leaned forward, attempting to project a warm paternal glow. Family always sticks together, he declared, sweeping his gaze across the table. That is what I have always taught you girls. We push each other because we want the best for each other. Sometimes a father has to employ tough love to forge a strong character. I knew that if I challenged you, if I made you hungry for success, you would eventually rise to the occasion and prove your worth. You inherited my relentless business acumen. It just took a little time to manifest in the right direction. I am incredibly proud of the empire you built. The sheer hypocrisy of his speech was almost suffocating. He was actively trying to take credit for the success he had spent the last 5 years trying to destroy. I glanced at Grandma Rose. She rolled her eyes and took a sip of her water, thoroughly entertained by the sudden groveling. Allison was struggling to process the reality. Her eyes darted from the magazine to my face, her mind desperately trying to reconcile her immense jealousy with the undeniable fact that I was now vastly more wealthy than she could ever hope to be. Her luxury real estate commissions meant nothing now. Lauren Allison said, her voice tight and unnaturally high. I had no idea your little venture had scaled so significantly. We really should have been communicating more. We are operating in the same tax bracket now. We are peers. She forced a laugh that sounded more like a choke. DeAndre saw his opening. The panic that had paralyzed him just moments ago vanished quickly, replaced by the calculated predatory gaze of an investment banker spotting a massive pool of liquid capital. He straightened his posture, leaning into the table with a sudden air of profound professional respect. Lauren, I have to hand it to you, DeAndre said, his tone entirely transformed. He dropped the condescending elder statesman act and adopted the smooth peer-to-peer cadence of a boardroom negotiation. Building a $300 million enterprise in this macroeconomic climate requires exceptional strategic vision. You have clearly demonstrated remarkable operational efficiency and market penetration. I respect that, I truly do. It takes a certain kind of genius to scale a food service concept into a national corporate powerhouse. He smiled, showing his perfectly whitened teeth, projecting an illusion of shared elite status. He steepled his fingers together, looking at me as if we were old business partners closing a major deal. You know, sitting here looking at this tremendous success, it occurs to me that we have a unique opportunity right in front of us. We are a family of highly successful operators. Your father built a strong foundation. Allison dominates the luxury property market. I handle institutional capital, and you have this incredible cash-generating retail brand. We have all the pieces to create a unified family conglomerate, a true dynasty. He paused deliberately, letting the word dynasty hang in the air. I watched him work. It was a masterful performance, completely ignoring the fact that he had just insulted my intelligence 10 minutes ago. Now he needed me. I could smell the desperation beneath his expensive cologne. Allison has been developing a premier commercial real estate portfolio. DeAndre continued, gesturing smoothly toward his wife. We recently secured a massive plot of prime commercial zoning in the downtown district. It is slated to be the most exclusive retail and residential hub in the city. But to properly leverage the asset and accelerate the construction timeline, we are looking to bring on an exclusive equity partner. He leaned closer, his eyes locking onto mine with intense, manufactured sincerity. An anchor investor, he strongly emphasized to me right now. Someone who understands visionary growth. Allison Development is currently facing some minor logistical delays due to temporary capital restructuring on my end. What we are offering you tonight, Lauren, is a private family partnership. We need an immediate capital injection of $15 million to clear the zoning hurdles and finalize the contractor bids. In exchange, Urban Crave gets priority placement in the flagship commercial space, and you get a guaranteed return on the development equity. It is a brilliant tax strategy. Exactly $15 million. He said the enormous number so incredibly ridiculously casually, as if asking me to simply pass the salt. He was demanding a massive $15 million bailout for his failing real estate project, framing it as an exclusive privilege. He genuinely believed I was naive enough to hand over a massive chunk of my hard-earned liquidity just to buy my way into their shallow, pretentious world. My parents nodded along eagerly, fully supporting DeAndre and his ridiculous proposal. They looked at me with bright, expectant eyes, waiting for me to eagerly sign away my fortune to the golden child. I looked around the table at their bright, expectant eyes, waiting for me to eagerly sign away my fortune to the golden child. I held that gaze for a long moment, letting the sheer absurdity of the situation wash over me. And then I laughed. It was not a polite, socially acceptable chuckle. It was a deep, genuine, echoing laugh that bubbled up from my chest and filled the entire dining room. I threw my head back and laughed right in DeAndre's face. The sound shattered their manufactured reality. My father lowered his hands, his paternal smile instantly freezing. Diane shifted uncomfortably in her chair, glancing around as if my laughter was a physical mess she needed to clean up. DeAndre blinked, the smooth confidence draining from his features, replaced by a sudden sharp flash of genuine panic. He had expected me to be flattered. He had expected me to jump at the chance to finally be included in their elite inner circle. Lauren. I failed to see what is so amusing. DeAndre said, his voice tightening. He straightened his tie again, a clear, nervous tick. We are offering you a highly lucrative entry point into premium commercial real estate. This is a serious financial discussion. I stopped laughing, wiping a single tear of mirth from my eye. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, and matched his serious tone. DeAndre, let us be perfectly clear. You are not offering me an entry point. You are begging me for a lifeline. His mouth opened, but I cut him off before he could formulate another corporate buzzword. Do you really think I built a $300 million enterprise by being stupid? I have an entire corporate intelligence team. I know exactly what is happening in the commercial sector right now, and I know exactly what is happening with your specific firm. I picked up my wine glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip. Your boutique investment fund was just hit with a severe credit rating downgrade last Tuesday. You are over-leveraged on 3 different commercial properties, including Allison's massive stalled development downtown. The contractor bids did not just stall because of minor logistical delays. They stalled because your primary lenders froze your credit lines. You are bleeding cash, DeAndre. You are staring down the barrel of a massive default, and you desperately need a cash injection to stop the bank from seizing the collateral. The color drained entirely from DeAndre's face. He looked like a man who had just been stripped naked in public. He opened his mouth to deny it, to spin another web of financial jargon, but the truth was too heavy, too absolute. He knew I had him completely cornered. And as for your generous offer, I continued, turning my attention to Allison, who was staring at her husband in absolute horror. You want me to hand over $15 million of my clean, hard-earned liquidity to bail out your failing project? You want me to reward the same people who stole my culinary school fund? You want me to finance the lifestyle of the sister who spent the last decade making sure I felt like a worthless failure? I sat back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. Here is my official response to your exclusive family partnership. Absolutely not. You will not get a single dime from me. Not $15 million. Not $15. Not a single cent of my empire will ever be used to subsidize your fake, crumbling facade. My father slammed his fist onto the table. Lauren, you are stepping way out of line. You are speaking to your family. We are in a temporary bind, and you have more money than you could ever possibly need. It is your duty to help your sister. My duty? I asked, my voice deadly calm. My duty was to survive after you threw me to the wolves. I owe this family absolutely nothing. You made your investments. You allocated your capital. Now you get to live with the returns. That was the breaking point for Allison. The realization that her luxury lifestyle was evaporating, combined with the fact that her despised older sister held the key to her salvation and was flatly refusing to turn it, shattered her completely. Allison pushed her chair back with such force that it tipped over and crashed onto the hardwood floor. You jealous witch! She screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. Her carefully maintained poise vanished, replaced by the ugly, entitled rage of a spoiled child who is finally being told no. You planned this! Allison shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. You came here tonight just to ruin my life. You have always been jealous of me. You have always hated that Mom and Dad loved me more, that I married a successful man, that I have a beautiful home. You are just a bitter, vindictive cook who got lucky, and now you want to watch me suffer. She paced back and forth behind her fallen chair, her breath coming in ragged, angry gasps. We needed that money, Lauren. DeAndre promised me we would break ground next month. My entire reputation in the luxury market is tied to that downtown development. If it goes under, I am a laughingstock. You have hundreds of millions of dollars, and you are going to sit there and watch my career die just because you are holding on to a pathetic grudge over some stupid culinary school money from 10 years ago. It is not about the past, Allison, I said smoothly, completely unaffected by her tantrum. It is about risk management. I do not invest in bad assets. And right now, you and your husband are the most toxic assets I have ever seen. Diane stood up, tears streaming down her face, rushing to comfort her hysterical golden child. She wrapped her arms around Allison tightly, trying to calm her down. Diane stroked her hair, glaring at me over her crying shoulder. The tears on my mother's face quickly transformed from sympathetic sorrow for her youngest daughter into a weaponized mask of maternal suffering. She gently pushed Allison toward DeAndre, who was staring blankly at the ruined tablecloth, and took a slow, calculated step toward me. How can you be so cruel, Lauren? Diane whispered, her voice trembling with that specific pitch of manufactured agony she had perfected over 3 decades. You sit there counting your millions and watch your own flesh and blood crumble. We raised you. We gave you a beautiful home, food on your table, and a pristine neighborhood to grow up in. You owe this family your very existence. If it were not for the foundation Howard and I provided, you would be absolutely nothing. You have a moral obligation to help us. You owe us for every single sacrifice we made to bring you into this world. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I watched my mother wield her ultimate weapon, the eternal debt of childhood, and I felt absolutely nothing but a profound sense of pity. You gave me the bare minimum required by law, Mom, I stated, my voice echoing clearly in the sudden quiet of the dining room. You provided food and shelter because that is what parents are legally obligated to do. But you never provided support. You never provided belief. You never provided unconditional love. You drained my culinary school fund to buy Allison a luxury vacation disguised as a wedding. You kicked me out emotionally the moment I refused to fit into your shallow, status-obsessed mold. So do not stand there and lecture me about the sacrifices of motherhood. I paid off whatever imaginary debt you think I owe you the day I walked out of this house with nothing but the clothes on my back and built a $300 million empire entirely from scratch. I paid it off when I slept on the floor of my first commercial kitchen. I paid it off when I worked 20-hour shifts to make payroll, while you were busy telling your country club friends I was a shameful failure. The debt is settled, Diane. The ledger is completely clear. You hold absolutely zero equity in my life. My mother gasped, taking a dramatic step backward as if I had physically struck her across the face. She looked toward my father, her eyes wide with shock, searching for someone to defend her shattered ego. She had spent her entire adult life utilizing guilt as a perfectly sharpened tool, effortlessly manipulating every single family member to conform to her precise demands. Seeing that tool shatter against my unwavering confidence left her completely paralyzed. She opened her mouth to argue, to hurl another barrage of toxic insults, but she simply could not find the words. The irrefutable truth of my immense financial independence had completely stripped away her perceived authority. She was no longer speaking to a vulnerable, desperate daughter seeking her validation. She was speaking to a powerful, ruthless corporate executive who had absolutely no patience for her pathetic, manipulative games. Howard stepped forward, his face a terrifying mask of purple rage. "You listen to me right now," he bellowed, pointing a thick finger directly at my chest. "You will not disrespect your mother in my house. You will write that check to DeAndre, or you will never step foot in this estate again. You will be entirely cut off from this family forever." I laughed softly, picking up my designer coat from the back of my chair. "Dad, you cut me off 10 years ago. You just did not realize I was busy building a much bigger, vastly superior table while you were fiercely guarding this pathetic, sinking ship." I slipped my arms into my coat, adjusting the collar with meticulous care. I took a moment to truly look at the people standing before me. I looked at DeAndre, who was now sweating profusely, his phone buzzing incessantly on the table, likely another margin call he could not answer. I looked at Allison, whose mascara was running down her face in ugly dark streaks, her luxury facade completely shattered by the impending reality of bankruptcy. And finally, I looked at Howard and Diane, two people who had gambled their entire family dynamic on the wrong horse and lost everything. I turned away from their stunned, horrified faces and walked toward the far end of the dining room. Grandma Rose was still sitting there, quietly sipping her water, observing the absolute wreckage of her son, arrogant household. I leaned down and wrapped my arms around her frail shoulders, pulling her into a tight, genuine hug. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered softly into her ear. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. I will send my driver to pick you up for lunch next week. We have a lot of celebrating to do." She patted my cheek with her soft, wrinkled hand and smiled brightly. "I am so incredibly proud of you, my sweet girl," she replied, her voice filled with pure, unadulterated joy. "Now go. You have a massive empire to run." I straightened up, grabbed my custom leather tote bag containing the Forbes magazine, and walked briskly down the grand hallway toward the heavy oak front door. Behind me, the dining room erupted into a catastrophic symphony of chaos. Allison began screaming at DeAndre about his failing funds, Howard was yelling at Allison to calm down, and Diane was sobbing hysterically over the ruined holiday. I opened the front door, stepped out into the crisp, freezing winter air, and closed the door firmly behind me, leaving the screaming match completely behind. The cold wind felt like absolute freedom. I walked toward my waiting luxury car, eager to leave this toxic nightmare. My corporate empire was waiting, and I had business to run. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, the heavy thud of the door sealing me inside a quiet sanctuary. The heated leather immediately began warming the winter chill from my bones. I gripped the steering wheel, taking a deep, cleansing breath. For the first time in my entire life, my chest did not feel tight after leaving my parents' house. The crushing weight of their expectations, the constant need to prove my worth, the suffocating guilt they had weaponized since my childhood vanished. I put the car in drive and accelerated down the winding, snow-dusted driveway, leaving the shouting match far behind me. The glowing dashboard clock read 9:15. It was still early, and the night felt incredibly young. I merged onto the highway, watching the city lights blur into bright streaks of gold and white against the dark sky. A profound sense of liberation washed over me. I had finally looked my abusers in the eye and stripped away their power. I was untouchable. My phone began ringing, vibrating loudly against the center console. I glanced down at the screen. The caller identification displayed Cameron, my chief operating officer. Cameron never called me on a holiday evening unless something was catastrophically wrong. He was fiercely protective of my personal time, knowing exactly how much energy it took to deal with my toxic family. I tapped a button on the steering wheel, routing the urgent call through the car audio system. "Cameron," I said, keeping my voice steady, "tell me you are calling to wish me a Merry Christmas, and not to deliver a corporate disaster." "Lauren, I am so sorry to interrupt your dinner," Cameron said. His voice was unusually tight, stripped of its normal, easygoing cadence. "We have a massive operational emergency. I am looking at a series of automated breach of contract notices that just flooded our secure corporate servers 10 minutes ago." My entire demeanor shifted instantly. The liberated daughter vanished immediately, replaced by the ruthless chief executive officer. "Talk to me," I commanded, accelerating into the fast lane. "What exactly are we looking at?" "It is our primary national supplier." Cameron explained, his fingers typing rapidly on a keyboard in the background. "They just froze every single one of our active contracts. All scheduled deliveries for premium beef and organic produce have been halted nationwide, effective immediately. The logistics dashboard is lighting up red across all 150 locations." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind calculating the devastating impact. Urban Crave relied heavily on farm-to-table freshness. Our brand identity was built entirely on sourcing high-quality premium ingredients. We did not use frozen substitutes or cheap commercial filler. If our primary supplier halted shipments, our restaurants would run out of core menu items within 48 hours. It would completely paralyze our daily operations, resulting in massive revenue losses and a catastrophic public relations nightmare right in the middle of our aggressive national expansion phase. "How is that legally possible?" I demanded, weaving through the sparse holiday traffic. "We have ironclad multi-year vendor agreements. They cannot just freeze our supply chain without triggering massive financial penalties and immediate litigation." "That is the problem," Cameron replied, his voice grim. "They invoked a force majeure clause due to a sudden corporate restructuring. Our supplier was just acquired in a hostile all-cash buyout late this afternoon. A mysterious holding company purchased their entire operational infrastructure. The new ownership group immediately restructured all existing client agreements. They are legally claiming that the previous contracts are void under the new corporate entity, and they are demanding we sign revised distribution agreements by tomorrow morning." "What are the new terms?" I asked, already knowing the answer would be terrible. "They are hiking our wholesale prices by exactly 40% across the board," Cameron said. "A 40% overnight increase on all premium beef and organic produce. If we do not sign the new agreements and agree to the inflated pricing structure, they will permanently sever our supply lines. They know we cannot secure a replacement national vendor with matching volume capacity on a holiday weekend. They have us completely boxed in, Lauren. They are intentionally strangling our supply chain to bleed our cash reserves. A 40% hike would decimate our profit margins." It was not a negotiation. It was blatant corporate extortion. Someone with immense capital and aggressive market tactics had specifically targeted the most vulnerable link in my operational chain. They had waited for a holiday, knowing the courts would be closed and emergency injunctions would be nearly impossible to file in time. "Do we have any information on this new holding company?" I asked, my brain working in overdrive to formulate a powerful counteroffensive. "Who exactly just bought our supplier?" "The corporate registration is buried under multiple layers of shell companies," Cameron explained, frustration evident in his tone. "The primary entity is listed as an offshore limited liability corporation. I have our legal team running expedited traces on the corporate directors right now, but they are using sophisticated financial shielding to hide the true owners. Whoever orchestrated this buyout has access to elite institutional capital. They moved incredibly fast and executed a highly coordinated market ambush. I need you to mobilize the entire executive crisis team." I ordered, my voice hard and decisive. "Wake up the head of logistics, the chief financial officer, and our lead corporate counsel. I want everyone in the war room at headquarters within the hour. Tell legal to draft emergency cease and desist orders, and have logistics start contacting every secondary regional farm within a 500-mile radius of our distribution hubs. We are not paying a 40% markup to a faceless holding company." "I am already at headquarters," Cameron said. "The team is logging on securely now. Drive safe, Lauren. We will be ready when you arrive." I ended the call, speeding forward to save my massive empire. The glass doors of Urban Crave headquarters slid open as I strode into the brightly lit lobby at exactly 2 in the morning. The building was usually a quiet monument to my success during these early hours, but tonight it hummed with frantic, focused energy. I bypassed the security desk with a quick nod and took the private elevator straight to the executive floor. My mind was already categorizing the catastrophic financial implications of a halted supply chain. When the elevator doors parted, the sounds of ringing phones and rapid typing filled the corridor. I walked directly into the primary conference room, affectionately known as the War Room. Cameron was standing at the head of the massive oak table, his sleeves rolled up and a tablet in his hand. The enormous digital displays covering the walls were illuminated with supply chain maps, financial projections, and complex corporate organizational charts. Our chief financial officer, a sharp man named David, was frantically running numbers on his laptop, while our lead corporate counsel, a ruthless attorney named Rachel, was surrounded by stacks of rapidly printed legal documents. The air in the room was thick with tension and the bitter scent of stale black coffee. We did not exchange pleasantries. There was no time for basic corporate etiquette when our entire national operation was under a direct, devastating attack. I tossed my coat onto an empty chair and took my position at the center of the table, pulling a digital stylus from my pocket. "Give me the current operational status," I commanded, looking directly at Cameron. "Tell me exactly how much runway we have before our restaurants start running out of premium beef and organic produce. I need concrete timelines and hard data so we can formulate a counteroffensive." Cameron swiped his screen, sending a detailed logistics map to the main display. The map showed our 150 locations blinking in synchronized warning patterns. "We have 48 hours of buffer inventory currently sitting in our regional distribution hubs," Cameron explained, using a laser pointer to highlight the critical zones. "After that, we hit a hard wall. The suppliers have locked their loading docks and instructed their freight drivers to stand down until we sign the newly revised corporate distribution agreements featuring the 40% price hike. If we agree to their extortionate terms, we will hemorrhage millions of dollars in unexpected operational costs within the first fiscal quarter alone." David, our chief financial officer, pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Lauren," he began, his voice tight with financial anxiety, "a 40% sudden increase in primary ingredient costs will completely obliterate our current profit margins. We would have to pass those costs directly onto our consumers immediately, which would severely damage our brand reputation and alienate our loyal customer base. We cannot sustain that kind of financial hemorrhage while we are simultaneously funding our aggressive national expansion campaign." Rachel, our lead corporate counsel, slammed a thick folder onto the table. "And we cannot easily drag them into federal court on a holiday weekend to force a temporary injunction," she added, her eyes scanning the legal clauses. Their acquisition lawyers executed this hostile takeover with terrifying precision. They utilized a rare force majeure loophole hidden deep within the original vendor contracts. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they deliberately timed the execution to maximize our operational panic and completely neutralize our immediate legal remedies. I stared at the blinking red lights on the digital map, my jaw set in a hard line. This level of precise execution required immense capital, elite legal maneuvering, and highly privileged insider knowledge of our specific operational vulnerabilities. I turned my attention to the complex corporate organizational charts displayed on the secondary monitors. "Show me the holding company," I demanded. "I want to know exactly who just spent millions of dollars to buy out our national supplier just to squeeze our margins. Who is pulling the strings behind this corporate curtain?" Cameron brought up a dense web of interconnected financial entities. "The primary acquiring entity is registered as Apex Horizon Holdings," he stated, tracing the lines connecting the various corporate boxes. "But Apex Horizon is merely a localized shell. It is wholly owned by a larger umbrella corporation based in Delaware, which is in turn owned by a blind trust registered in the Cayman Islands. They have buried the true ownership under 4 distinct layers of aggressive financial shielding. We have been digging through the public filings, tax identification numbers, and international corporate registries for the past 2 hours. The structure is incredibly sophisticated. It is designed specifically to prevent anyone from identifying the ultimate beneficial owners holding the equity." I leaned closer to the high-resolution monitors, my eyes rapidly scanning the interconnected nodes of the corporate structure. They were using classic institutional investment tactics to mask their identity. They wanted us to feel like we were fighting an invisible, unstoppable ghost. But every financial transaction leaves a digital footprint. Every shell company requires a registered agent, a primary banking institution, and a trail of capitalization. Someone had to sign the initial funding wire transfers to execute the buyout. "We need to pierce the corporate veil," I said softly, my mind connecting the strategic dots. This was not a random market fluctuation. This was a targeted hostile squeeze designed exclusively to bleed our capital reserves dry. Someone watched our aggressive expansion and deliberately bought the singular vulnerability in our logistics chain. Rachel typed furiously on her keyboard. "I am pulling the routing numbers from the acquisition escrow account. We can trace the capital origin if we follow the money backward through their Delaware subsidiary." Cameron zoomed in on a specific document displayed on the massive screen. "Look at this acquisition filing," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "They aggressively outbid two massive competitors, paying a 30% premium above market value. This is an assassination attempt against our corporate empire." The words hung in the sterile air of the war room, heavy and absolute. I stood perfectly still, my eyes locked on the digital map that showed the lifeblood of my business being systematically drained. Someone had spent an astronomical amount of capital not just to enter the market, but specifically to break me. Rachel continued typing at a furious pace, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she bypassed standard corporate registries and accessed deeper federal filing databases. If they paid a 30% premium above market value, Rachel reasoned they had to secure that funding through a major institutional lender. You cannot wire that kind of cash from a Cayman Islands trust without triggering a federal regulatory flag. There has to be a domestic guarantor holding the bag for the acquisition. Cameron nodded immediately, shifting his focus to the banking routing numbers tied to the escrow account used for the supplier buyout. He projected a new terminal window onto the main display, lines of code and financial transfer data scrolling rapidly. He began isolating the domestic wire transfers, peeling back the layers of the offshore holding company. "They routed the money through 3 different banks," Cameron said, his voice tense with concentration. "But the primary collateral originated from a domestic wealth management fund based right here in Chicago. I am pulling the corporate officers for that fund right now." I walked closer to the massive screen, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "Bring up the board of directors for the domestic fund," I commanded. "I want to see the faces of the people who think they can hold my supply chain hostage." Cameron hit a final keystroke, executing the data extraction. A document flashed onto the center display. It was a standard corporate disclosure form required by the Securities and Exchange Commission, listing the primary stakeholders and executive officers of the domestic fund that had financed the hostile takeover. I stared at the screen, my breath suddenly catching in my throat. The room around me seemed to spin, the hum of the servers fading into a distant, muffled roar. At the very top of the executive roster, listed as the primary managing partner and chief executive officer of the funding entity, was a name I knew intimately. DeAndre, my brother-in-law. The same man who had sat across from me at the Christmas dinner table just hours ago, wearing his custom suit and swirling his expensive wine. The same man who had arrogantly demanded a $15 million capital injection for his failing real estate project. My mind reeled, struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. He did not just happen to need a bailout, he had actively orchestrated my operational crisis. But the nightmare did not end there. Cameron scrolled down to the list of silent partners and advisory board members attached to DeAndre investment firm. There, sitting quietly on the secondary roster with a 10% equity stake in the holding company, was another familiar name. Howard. My father. Lauren Cameron whispered, his voice laced with absolute shock as he looked from the screen to my face. "This is your family. Your brother-in-law and your father just bought out our national supplier." I leaned heavily against the oak conference table, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edge. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. The timeline I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. Cameron pulled the exact date they established the Delaware Shell Company used for the acquisition. I need to know exactly when they set this trap. Cameron rapidly cross-referenced the corporate registration dates. October 12th, he stated, highlighting the filing date on the monitor. Exactly 3 months ago. 3 months ago. The realization hit me like a physical blow. 3 months ago was exactly when the initial industry rumors began circulating that Forbes was evaluating my corporate empire for a cover feature. My father and DeAndre must have caught wind of the upcoming media exposure through their own financial networking channels. They realized that my supposed little food truck hobby was actually a massive cash-rich enterprise. And instead of being proud, they saw an opportunity to exploit my success. They planned this, Rachel said, her legal mind instantly grasping the horrific scope of the conspiracy. They knew they could not just ask you for millions of dollars. They knew you would refuse. So they spent the last 3 months quietly leveraging their own failing assets to secure enough capital to buy out your primary supplier. They deliberately engineered this supply chain crisis to bleed your cash reserves dry and force your company to the brink of bankruptcy. It was a manufactured disaster. I said, the pieces of their sinister strategy fully locking into place. I stood up straight, the shock completely burning away, leaving behind a cold, calculating fury. DeAndre was not offering me an exclusive partnership at the dinner table tonight. He was offering me a mafia-style protection racket. They choked off my meat and produce supply, knowing I would panic when the 40% price hike hit. They expected me to come crawling to them desperate for operational liquidity. And then DeAndre would swoop in like a savior, offering to fix the supply chain issue he created, but only if I signed over a massive chunk of my corporate equity to his failing investment fund. They tried to extort me. I continued, my voice echoing in the silent war room. My father and my sister's husband conspired to destroy my life's work, just to save their own pathetic, crumbling social status. They smiled in my face, ate a holiday meal with me, and tried to manipulate me into handing over my empire. David, our chief financial officer, looked completely horrified. Lauren, this goes beyond corporate espionage. We are going to destroy them. I looked at David and gave him a single sharp nod. Yes, we are, I replied, my voice steady and cold. But we are going to do it to their faces. I am not hiding behind lawyers just yet. I want to look into their eyes when they realize I know exactly what kind of monsters they truly are. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair and turned to Cameron. Keep the legal team working on the debt acquisition strategy we discussed. Do not sleep. Do not stop. I need every single financial vulnerability DeAndre has exposed by noon today. Cameron saluted me with his coffee cup, his eyes burning with the same ruthless determination that fueled my own heartbeat. I left the headquarters as the sun began to rise over the city, casting a harsh, unforgiving light across the skyline. I did not go home to sleep. I drove back to my apartment, took a freezing cold shower, and put on the most intimidating tailored power suit I owned. It was a sleek, dark charcoal jacket with sharp lapels paired with stilettos that clicked against the hardwood floor like the ticking of a countdown clock. I applied my makeup with military precision, erasing any trace of the exhausted, betrayed daughter, leaving only the untouchable chief executive officer of a $300 million empire. Today, I was going to war. The drive into the downtown financial district was a blur of morning traffic and icy determination. DeAndre operated out of a high-rise glass tower that dominated the skyline, a towering monument to corporate ego and leveraged debt. It was the kind of building designed specifically to make visitors feel small and insignificant. I parked my car in the underground VIP garage, ignoring the attendant who tried to redirect me. I stepped into the private elevator, swiping a master access card I had acquired through a real estate contact months ago. The elevator shot upward, my stomach remaining perfectly still. I felt no fear. I felt no anxiety. I felt only the cold, mechanical precision of a predator closing in on its prey. The doors opened onto the 45th floor, revealing a sprawling reception area decorated in aggressive modern minimalism. Polished marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and a massive steel logo of DeAndre Investment Firm hung on the wall behind a pristine white desk. A young, polished receptionist looked up, her manicured fingers hovering over her keyboard. She opened her mouth to ask for my appointment details, offering a practiced, superficial smile. I did not even break my stride. I walked right past her desk, my heels striking the marble with rhythmic, dominant force. "Excuse me, miss." The receptionist called out, her voice rising in sudden panic. "You cannot go back there. Mr. DeAndre is in a closed-door meeting. You need to sign in with security immediately." I ignored her, completely pushing through the heavy glass partition that separated the reception area from the inner executive suites. Two security guards in dark suits stepped out from a side corridor, their hands raising defensively as they moved to intercept me. "Stand down," I commanded, projecting my voice with absolute, unwavering authority. "I am family, and I am here to finalize the merger. If you put a hand on me, your boss will fire you before you can even apologize." The sheer confidence in my tone made them hesitate for exactly 2 seconds. That was all the time I needed. I breezed past them, navigating the plush, carpeted hallway with single-minded focus. I knew exactly where the corner office was located. It was the biggest suite on the floor, boasting panoramic views of the city, a physical representation of DeAndre's inflated self-importance. I reached the towering double mahogany doors. I did not knock. I did not announce myself. I reached out, grabbed the polished brass handles, and shoved the doors open with a violent shove that sent them crashing against the interior walls. The scene inside the office was a perfect, sickening portrait of familial betrayal. The room was obnoxiously lavish, filled with expensive leather furniture, abstract art, and a massive mahogany desk that cost more than my first food truck. Sitting behind that desk, looking incredibly smug, was DeAndre. And sitting directly across from him, holding a stack of financial documents, was my father, Howard. They both jumped at the loud crash of the doors, their heads snapping toward the entrance. My father dropped the papers onto the desk, his eyes widening in sheer shock. DeAndre spilled a drop of espresso onto his expensive tie, his confident demeanor shattering for a brief, glorious moment. They were looking over the exact supply chain acquisition documents they had used to choke my business. They were sitting there drinking imported coffee, literally calculating the exact moment my company would run out of inventory and go bankrupt. "Lauren," my father sputtered, half rising from his leather guest chair. "What in the world are you doing here? You cannot just barge into a private executive office like a lunatic." I stepped fully into the room, letting the heavy mahogany doors slowly swing shut behind me, sealing us inside. I stood in the center of the plush oriental rug, staring them down. "I am not a lunatic, Dad," I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Urban Crave, and I am here to discuss the hostile takeover of my national supply chain." DeAndre quickly recovered his composure, leaning back in his oversized black leather chair. He steepled his fingers, projecting a fake dominance, but a slight tremor betrayed his deep panic. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Lauren," he lied very smoothly. "This is a highly respected private firm. Please leave before I call building security." I took 2 steps toward his massive desk, resting my hands flat against the polished wood. "Call them," I challenged, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Let them escort me out. But while we wait for them to arrive, let us discuss Apex Horizon Holdings. Let us talk about the blind trust in the Cayman Islands, the Delaware subsidiary, and the domestic wealth management fund that you oversee. Let us chat about the 30% premium you paid to choke my logistics network." DeAndre stared at me. The fake corporate smile vanished entirely, replaced by a dark, ugly scowl. He slowly lowered his hands on the desk. He realized instantly that my intelligence team had completely unraveled his elaborate financial labyrinth. The jig was up. He did not need to pretend anymore. He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, suddenly trying to use his physical height to intimidate me. "You think you are so smart, Lauren?" He sneered, all traces of familial politeness completely gone. You figure out a few routing numbers and suddenly you think you can sit at the big table. Let me tell you how the real world operates. You are just a lucky cook. I play the real financial game. You got handed a few good reviews, sold some overpriced tacos, and now you think you are a corporate titan. I manipulate markets. I dictate the terms of survival. I did not back down. I held my ground, meeting his furious gaze with absolute calm. You bought my supplier to force me into bankruptcy? I stated clearly, wanting the facts laid bare. You intentionally froze my contracts. DeAndre walked around the side of his desk, closing the distance between us. He looked down at me with pure, unfiltered classist disgust. I engineered a market correction, he stated. I saw an overvalued, vulnerable target, and I leveraged my institutional capital to capture it. That is not bankruptcy, Lauren. That is business. And right now, I hold the absolute key to your survival. Tomorrow morning, your distribution hubs will run dry. Your employees will have nothing to cook, and your highly publicized Forbes valuation will plummet to zero. Your entire brand will become a cautionary tale of a food truck operator who expanded too fast and burned out. Unless what I asked, my tone perfectly even. Unless you sign over 40% of Urban Crave equity to my investment fund by the close of business today, DeAndre demanded, his eyes gleaming with greedy malice. You give me 40% and magically your supply chain issues disappear. The delivery trucks start rolling again. The 40% price hike is completely reversed. Your little empire gets to live another day. If you refuse, I will personally guarantee that your logistics network is permanently bankrupted by tomorrow. I turned my head slightly, looking at my father. He had remained silent during DeAndre's vicious tirade, sitting in his leather chair like a passive spectator to his own daughter's corporate execution. He was listed as a silent partner on the holding company. He was fully complicit in this extortion. Are you seriously going to sit there and let him do this? Dad, I asked, keeping my voice deceptively soft. You are helping him extort your own flesh and blood. You are helping him steal nearly half of my company. Howard sighed heavily, shifting in his seat. He refused to look me directly in the eye, instead focusing on the gold pen resting on the desk. He adjusted his suit, clearing his throat to summon his authoritative patriarchal tone. Lauren, you are being overly emotional about a standard corporate merger, my father said, completely dismissing the blatant blackmail that had just occurred. DeAndre is offering you a highly sophisticated restructuring plan. You do not understand the complexities of corporate finance at this level. You are a chef, not an investment banker. You need seasoned executives to guide your brand through this volatile growth phase. Just listen to the men and do what is best for the family. Do not let your stubborn pride destroy what little success you have managed to scrape together. The sheer, unadulterated misogyny and betrayal in his words settled over the room like a thick layer of toxic smoke. He truly believed I was incapable. He truly believed that DeAndre, a man currently drowning in toxic debt, was somehow my superior simply because he wore a suit and shouted financial jargon. They were completely blinded by their own arrogance. And that arrogance was their fatal flaw. As my father finished his pathetic, enabling speech, I crossed my arms over my chest. In doing so, I casually brushed my right index finger against the digital face of my Apple Watch. The screen woke up, displaying a small, pulsing red circle. I tapped it once. The voice memo application instantly engaged, silently recording every single syllable spoken in the room. So just to be absolutely clear, I said, projecting my voice slightly to ensure the microphone captured the audio in perfect high-definition clarity. I want to make sure I understand the exact terms of this family arrangement. DeAndre, you have intentionally acquired my national supply chain using your investment fund. You are deliberately withholding critical inventory and threatening to bankrupt my entire operation. And the only way you will release my supply chain is if I surrender 40% of Urban Crave equity to you today. Is that an accurate summary of your demand? DeAndre smirked, completely unaware that he was sealing his own fate. He leaned against the edge of his mahogany desk, crossing his arms to mirror my posture. That is a perfectly accurate summary, Lauren, he confirmed, his voice dripping with absolute condescending triumph. You have no other choice today. So sign the paperwork right now and surrender to me and my brilliant financial mind. Otherwise, you lose everything before tomorrow morning and remain a failure to this family forever. I lowered my head, letting my shoulders slump a fraction of an inch to sell the illusion of defeat. DeAndre and my father exchanged a look of supreme satisfaction, completely unaware that the digital device on my wrist had just captured the federal crime of extortion in crystal clear audio. I turned around silently, letting the heavy mahogany doors click shut behind me as I walked out of the corner office. My stilettos sank into the plush carpet of the reception area, but I kept my pace slow and defeated for the benefit of the security cameras. As soon as the elevator doors closed and I was alone in the descending steel box, a sharp, genuine smile broke across my face. I tapped my watch, saving the audio file to an encrypted cloud server and instantly sending a duplicate directly to Cameron. We had them. We had the exact leverage we needed. But securing the recording was only the first phase of my counteroffensive. If I deployed the audio now, DeAndre might still have enough time to scramble his legal team file injunctions and drag the supply chain freeze through months of grueling litigation. I needed him to feel absolutely invincible. I needed him to drop his guard completely so I could execute a fatal corporate strike. To do that, I had to give them exactly what they wanted. I had to become the broken, desperate daughter, begging for her family to save her. I drove away from the financial district, steering my car toward the sprawling suburban estate my parents called home. I parked a block away and pulled down the sun visor mirror. I needed to look the part of a ruined woman. I aggressively rubbed my eyes until they were bloodshot and watery. I smeared my carefully applied mascara, letting dark smudges settle beneath my lower lashes. I ran my hands through my sleek hair, tangling the strands until I looked frantic and unhinged. I practiced a ragged, gasping breath, channeling every ounce of frustration I had ever felt into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. When I was satisfied with the chaotic reflections staring back at me, I pulled into their long, winding driveway. I practically fell out of the car, leaving my expensive coat on the passenger seat to brave the freezing winter air in just my suit. I ran up the front steps and hammered my fist against the heavy wooden door, deliberately avoiding the polite doorbell. I wanted them to hear desperation. The door swung open to reveal Diane holding a cup of herbal tea and wearing a pristine cashmere sweater. Her initial look of annoyance instantly melted into a poorly concealed expression of hungry triumph when she saw my ruined makeup and frantic demeanor. "Mom!" I gasped, letting my voice crack perfectly on the syllable. I forced a harsh, ragged sob from my throat, collapsing forward slightly so she had to step back to let me into the grand foyer. "I am so sorry. You were right. You were both right about everything. I cannot do this alone anymore. The company is falling apart." Diane smiled, her eyes shining with terrifying predatory glee. She quickly set her teacup down on the entryway console and placed her hands on my shoulders, guiding me into the formal living room. Howard was sitting by the fireplace reading a financial newspaper. He looked up, his face breaking into a wide, arrogant smile as he took in my disheveled state. I sank onto the edge of their expensive white sofa, burying my face in my hands and forcing my shoulders to shake with manufactured sobs. "Dad," I cried, peeking through my fingers to gauge his reaction. DeAndre was right. The supply chain has completely collapsed. I have no inventory left for the weekend. The vendors are demanding an immediate 40% price increase and the corporate accounts are bleeding cash. If I do not secure immediate liquidity, the entire brand will be bankrupt by Monday morning. I am going to lose everything I built. I cannot lose Urban Crave. I just cannot. Howard slowly folded his newspaper and placed it on the coffee table. He stood up, walking over to me with the slow, deliberate pacing of a conquering general surveying a surrendered enemy. He looked down at me, his chest puffed out with absolute patriarchal authority. He did not offer comfort. He offered a lecture. I told you this would happen, Lauren, Howard said, his voice dripping with condescending satisfaction. I warned you about expanding too quickly without proper corporate guidance. You thought you could bypass the established hierarchy. You thought you could just cook your way to the top of the financial food chain without respecting the institutional knowledge that men like DeAndre and myself bring to the table. You let a magazine cover inflate your ego, and now the market is correcting your arrogance. This is exactly what happens when you refuse to listen to your family. Diane sat down next to me, her hand rubbing my back in a gesture that felt more like claiming ownership than offering solace. We tried to protect you from this harsh reality, Lauren. She cooed, her voice laced with poisonous sweetness. We told you yesterday that you needed our help, but you had to throw a tantrum and insult your sister. You had to march out of our house and pretend you were better than us. Now look at you. Look at what your stubborn pride has cost you. You are crying in my living room, begging for the very lifeline you so rudely rejected. I forced another loud sob, nodding my head vigorously in fake agreement. I know I wept, wiping away a fresh smudge of mascara. I was arrogant. I was stupid to think I could navigate a hostile market squeeze without his elite expertise. I do not know how to fix this. Please help me save my business today. Howard reached into his tailored slacks and pulled out his phone. He did not even bother asking if I was ready to surrender. He knew he had won. He dialed DeAndre's private number, putting it on speaker and resting it on the glass coffee table for maximum theatrical effect. The phone rang twice before DeAndre answered, his voice smooth and entirely too relaxed for a man running a fraudulent empire. "Howard here," my father boomed, looking down at my supposedly tearful face. Lauren is sitting in our living room. It seems the reality of the free market has finally caught up with her. She is now ready to discuss terms. A low rumbling chuckle echoed from the phone speaker. "Is that so?" DeAndre replied, his arrogance practically oozing through the digital connection. "Well, it is a good thing I am already pulling into your driveway. I figured she might need a family intervention after our morning chat." The heavy oak front door opened moments later. DeAndre strolled into the living room alongside Allison. My sister took one look at my ruined makeup and slumped posture and practically beamed. The jealousy that had consumed her for years was instantly replaced by a toxic, glowing satisfaction. She walked over to the velvet armchair and sat down, crossing her legs elegantly, ready to watch my complete humiliation unfold. DeAndre buttoned his suit jacket and stood beside my father. They formed a physical wall of patriarchy and condescension. He looked down at me, shaking his head with a perfectly practiced look of mock pity. "Lauren, Lauren, Lauren." DeAndre sighed, clicking his tongue. "I tried to warn you. I tried to offer you a lifeline at dinner last night, but you let your ego blind you to the macroeconomic realities of corporate expansion. Supply chains are fragile. They require institutional backing. You simply do not have the weight to bully national vendors. But because you are family, and because Allison has a remarkably forgiving heart, I am willing to step in and clean up this mess." I looked up at him, forcing my lower lip to tremble. "You can fix it?" I asked, pitching my voice an octave higher to sound small and terrified. "You can get the trucks rolling again before the weekend rush." DeAndre smiled a brilliant, predatory smile. "I can make one phone call right now and reverse the 40% price hike completely. I can guarantee your delivery schedules and secure your operational runway. But my terms from this morning remain absolute. My investment fund absorbs 40% of Urban Crave. We merge our entities. I take a controlling seat on your board of directors, and my firm manages all future expansion capital." I let a fresh tear track through the smudged mascara on my cheek. I nodded slowly, bowing my head in a picture of total unconditional surrender. "Okay," I whispered, staring at the floor. "I will sign. I will give you the 40%. Just please save my company." Allison clapped her hands together, letting out a sharp, delighted squeal. "Oh, this is absolutely perfect," she announced, her eyes flashing with a sudden brilliant idea. DeAndre, we cannot just sign this in a boring boardroom. We need to maximize the public relations value. My annual Winter Hope Charity Gala is this Saturday night. The entire city elite will be there. We have investors flying in from New York, local politicians, and all the major business press. DeAndre's eyes lit up with sheer greed. The prospect of standing in front of the city's wealthiest elites and announcing his hostile takeover of a brand recently featured on Forbes was too intoxicating for him to resist. He desperately needed that specific public relations boost. His own investment fund was bleeding cash, his credit rating was in the gutter, and his investors were likely getting nervous. A highly publicized acquisition of a massive cash-rich restaurant empire would instantly restore his fraudulent image and buy him the credibility he needed to keep his Ponzi scheme afloat. Allison is a genius. DeAndre agreed, turning to my father for approval. We will frame it as a strategic family merger. We will tell the press that Urban Crave requires top-tier financial stewardship to handle its rapid national growth, and my firm is stepping in to provide that elite infrastructure. It will make our fund look like an absolute powerhouse, and it will give Allison Real Estate Project the anchor tenant credibility it needs to secure the final construction permits. My mother clasped her hands together, her face glowing with renewed aristocratic pride. It is a brilliant narrative, Diane chimed in. A story of family unity and corporate salvation. It completely erases that embarrassing food truck history and elevates Lauren Brand to our social level. We will invite the local news anchors. We will have a ceremonial contract signing right on the main stage before the charity auction begins. DeAndre looked down at me, expecting resistance. He waited for my usual fierce independence to flare up, but I kept my shoulders slumped and my eyes fixed firmly on the rug. Do you understand the plan, Lauren? He demanded, adopting the tone of a boss addressing a subordinate. You will attend the gala this Saturday. You will dress appropriately. You will stand on that stage, smile for the cameras, and sign the equity transfer documents in front of my investors. I nodded meekly, keeping my voice utterly devoid of a fight. I understand, DeAndre. I will definitely be there. I will have my corporate counsel review the ceremonial paperwork, but I promise I will sign everything on stage. I just want this nightmare to be over. Excellent, Howard declared, practically vibrating with triumphant energy. He patted my aching shoulder with heavy, patronizing force. You are making a smart business decision. I stood up slowly, clutching my designer coat. I mumbled an apology to my mother, shuffling out of their grand living room, ready to execute my trap. The biting winter wind hit my face the moment I stepped outside my parents' front door, but I did not feel the cold. I felt electric. The pathetic, defeated posture I had maintained in their living room vanished instantly. I stood up straight, pulling my designer coat tight around my shoulders, and walked briskly to my car. I slid behind the wheel, locked the doors, and let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. They had swallowed the bait completely. They were so intoxicated by their own arrogance, so utterly convinced of my inferiority, that they never even considered they were walking into a trap. I connected my phone to the car audio system and dialed Cameron. He answered on the first ring. I have it, I said, accelerating down the suburban street and leaving my family toxic estate in the rearview mirror. I have the audio recording. DeAndre explicitly admitted to freezing our supply chain to force the equity transfer. He outlined the entire extortion plot. Get back to headquarters immediately, Cameron replied, his voice buzzing with adrenaline. I have Rachel waiting in the war room. We also pulled a wild card. I reached out to a contact at the Securities and Exchange Commission, a senior investigator named Harrison. He owes me a favor from my days working in corporate compliance. He is on a secure video link right now. 10 minutes later, I strode back into the Urban Crave executive suite. The war room was just as chaotic as it had been that morning, but the energy had shifted from desperate defense to aggressive offense. Rachel, our lead corporate counsel, was pacing the floor. On the main monitor, a man with sharp eyes and a graying beard looked back at us. This was Harrison, the senior investigator from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I did not waste time with introductions. I connected my encrypted cloud drive to the main display and hit play. The high-definition audio of DeAndre's arrogant, damning speech filled the room. We listened in absolute silence as his voice detailed the deliberate market manipulation, the hostile acquisition of my supply chain, and the explicit ultimatum demanding 40% of my corporate equity. When the recording finished, Rachel let out a low, impressed whistle. "That is textbook extortion and malicious market manipulation," Rachel stated, her legal mind rapidly processing the implications. "He basically handed us a signed confession wrapped in a bow. We can take this straight to the federal prosecutor." Harrison leaned closer to his camera, his expression turning incredibly serious. "Do not go to the prosecutor just yet," he instructed, his voice echoing through the conference room speakers. "This recording is explosive, Lauren, but it actually opens the door to something much larger. When Cameron contacted me earlier today about the sudden buyout of your supply chain, I initiated a quiet background trace on DeAndre investment firm. I flagged some highly irregular capital movements regarding his recent commercial real estate acquisitions." "What kind of irregular movements?" I asked, taking a seat at the head of the oak table. Harrison shared his screen, overlaying a complex web of financial transactions onto our digital map. "DeAndre firm has been aggressively soliciting institutional capital for the past 2 years, promising consistent high-yield returns on luxury commercial developments. The problem is that none of those commercial developments are actually generating any revenue. The projects, including your sister downtown real estate hub, are completely stalled. Yet DeAndre has continued paying massive dividends to his early investors." Cameron stared at the financial data, his eyes widening in sudden realization. If his projects are stalled and generating zero revenue, how is he paying out double-digit dividends to his original institutional backers? He is not paying them with revenue. David, our chief financial officer, interjected, stepping into the light of the monitors. "I have been analyzing his public liquidity filings while you were at your parents' house. He is paying the early investors using the principal capital raised from new investors." The entire room went dead silent. The magnitude of David's statement hit me like a freight train. "You are saying he is running a Ponzi scheme?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "My brother-in-law is running a massive illegal Ponzi scheme." "Exactly," Harrison confirmed, nodding gravely. "DeAndre is operating a classic high-level financial fraud, and the entire house of cards is about to collapse. The market recently shifted, and new investment capital has dried up. He can no longer secure new money to pay off the old money. His primary lenders have realized the commercial properties are massively overvalued, and they have issued catastrophic margin calls. He owes millions of dollars in immediate loan repayments, and he has zero liquid cash to cover the debt. He is completely insolvent." I stared at the financial charts, the ultimate truth of DeAndre's desperation finally becoming crystal clear. He was not trying to extort my company just to assert dominance or boost his ego. He was literally fighting for his freedom. "If he defaults on those margin calls, the banks will seize the collateral and audit his firm," Rachel explained, tracing the legal fallout. "The audit will instantly expose the Ponzi scheme. The federal government will freeze his assets, and he will be facing decades in federal prison for wire fraud securities, fraud and embezzlement." "Urban Crave is his get-out-of-jail-free card," Cameron said, slamming his hand on the table. "He saw our $300 million valuation. He needs our positive cash flow and our pristine corporate credit rating to satisfy his furious lenders and hide his massive financial crimes. That is why he risked everything to choke our supply chain. If he can force a merger and absorb our revenue, he can artificially inflate his balance sheets and keep the federal investigators away from his door. He thinks he backed me into a corner," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "But he just unknowingly handed me the golden keys to his crumbling kingdom." I turned my attention to David, my brilliant chief financial officer. "How much liquid capital can we mobilize within 48 hours without impacting our core operations?" David adjusted his glasses, his fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up our treasury dashboards. If we leverage secondary reserve accounts and pause third-quarter real estate acquisitions, we can mobilize $45 million in untraceable liquidity by tomorrow afternoon. That is more than enough, I stated, my eyes locked on the digital map of DeAndre's crumbling empire. Harrison, I need you to securely transmit the exact list of institutional lenders holding his toxic debt. I want the bank names, the specific loan officers, and the exact dollar amounts of his defaulting margin calls. Harrison nodded on the video screen, a grim smile appearing. I will send the encrypted files to Cameron immediately. Good luck out there, Lauren. With the data secured, we transformed the war room into a ruthless acquisitions hub. For the next 3 days, I barely slept, fueling my focus with black coffee and the anticipation of justice, while my parents and sister were picking out designer outfits for their gala and gloating about my supposed surrender. I was systematically dismantling their reality piece by piece. My legal teams worked around the clock, drafting aggressive purchase agreements. DeAndre was in default to 3 major regional banks. These institutions were panicking, holding tens of millions in commercial loans backed by worthless properties from his stalled projects. The banks faced massive write-downs that would damage their earnings. They were desperate to offload the toxic assets before federal regulators caught wind of the Ponzi scheme. I became their perfect, wealthy, and completely silent corporate savior. On Thursday morning, I walked into the downtown headquarters of the largest lender holding DeAndre paper. I wore a bespoke navy suit, bringing my arsenal of corporate lawyers. The bank executives looked exhausted, their ties loosened and faces pale with the stress of impending default. I sat at their massive conference table, sliding a single sheet of paper across the mahogany. I am offering to purchase the entirety of DeAndre's bad debt, I announced, echoing with financial authority. I will pay 40 cents on the dollar right now in liquid cash. You clear this toxic exposure from your balance sheets before the market closes, preventing a catastrophic public disclosure. In exchange, my holding company assumes total ownership of the debt and acquires all associated collateral. The executives stared at me as if I were a mirage. Taking a massive loss was infinitely better than zero, which is what they would get when DeAndre was indicted for wire fraud. They did not hesitate. The lead executive signed the transfer agreements with trembling hands. Over the next 48 hours, I repeated this ruthless maneuver with the remaining 2 banks. It was a masterclass in aggressive acquisitions. The lenders were so desperate to escape the blast radius of DeAndre's criminal implosion, they practically handed me the portfolios. By Friday evening, the operation was irreversibly finalized, without a single drop of any leaks. I sat in my office staring at the towering stack of legal documents. Cameron and Rachel stood beside me, reflecting the sheer magnitude of what we accomplished. It is done, Rachel confirmed, tapping the thickest binder. The transfer is legally binding and officially recorded. You are now the sole owner of $45 million in institutional debt previously held by your brother-in-law. I opened the main binder, flipping to the collateral schedules. This was the most crucial part of the entire strategy. When DeAndre secured these massive loans to fund his fraudulent empire, he had to pledge physical assets guaranteeing the borrowed capital. I ran my finger down the list of seized collateral. Right at the top was the downtown commercial development Allison prized so deeply. Her entire luxury real estate reputation was tied to that specific project, and I now held the absolute legal right to foreclose. But it did not stop there. DeAndre had grown so desperate for cash recently that he forced my parents to co-sign his latest round of leveraged loans. I turned the page, smiling a dark, humorless smile, taking in the absolute magnitude of my ultimate victory. Listed plainly on the secondary schedule was the sprawling suburban estate where I grew up. The exact same house where my mother weaponized guilt and my father demanded submission for decades. I now legally held the exclusive mortgage to their precious home. If I called in the debt, they would be instantly evicted. I closed the binder, the heavy thud resonating in the quiet office. Tomorrow night is the highly anticipated Winter Hope Charity Gala, I said, looking up at Cameron and Rachel. DeAndre and Allison truly think they are going to parade me onto a stage in front of the city's wealthiest investors. They think I'm going to publicly sign away 40% of my company to save my supply chain. They think they have completely conquered me. Cameron handed me a sleek black folder containing the foreclosure notices. They have absolutely no idea what is coming, he said, a fierce gleam in his eye. You are not just his sister-in-law anymore, Lauren. You are his corporate executioner. I took the black folder, sliding it carefully into my designer tote bag right next to my Apple Watch and the explosive audio recording. The trap was perfectly set. I had purchased their debt, secured their collateral, and legally obtained the power to destroy their entire fraudulent existence. They wanted a massive public spectacle to feed their insatiable egos and elevate their fraudulent social standing. I was going to step onto that brightly lit stage and give them a devastating financial massacre they would never forget. The Winter Hope Charity Gala was exactly the kind of ostentatious display my family loved. The downtown ballroom was transformed into a winter wonderland, with artificial snow cascading down the grand staircase and crystal ice sculptures flanking every doorway. The guest list read like a who is who of the city's financial elite. Politicians, real estate developers, and old money heirs mingled under the massive chandeliers, sipping champagne and networking aggressively. This was Allison's crowning achievement, her moment to prove she belonged at the very top of the social hierarchy. And tonight, she was using my supposed failure as the ultimate prop to elevate her status. I arrived at the venue precisely at 8 o'clock, stepping out of my hired car into the biting winter chill. I did not wear a $10,000 gown like my sister. I wore a tailored floor-length tuxedo dress in deep emerald green, a garment that projected power and corporate authority rather than frivolous luxury. I carried my sleek black tote bag, the one containing the foreclosure documents and the USB drive, with the audio recording clutching it like a weapon. The red carpet was swarming with local press and society photographers. As I approached the entrance, I saw Allison holding court near the media pit. She was wearing a blindingly silver sequined dress that caught every flashbulb, her hair styled into an elaborate updo. DeAndre stood right beside her, wearing a bespoke velvet tuxedo jacket, looking every inch the successful, benevolent financier. My parents hovered just behind them, smiling proudly for the cameras. They looked like the perfect, generous family, completely united in their philanthropic endeavors. I paused near a large ice sculpture, remaining out of their direct line of sight, but close enough to hear every single word. Allison was currently speaking to a reporter from the city's leading business journal. Her voice pitched loud enough to ensure the surrounding guests could hear her charitable narrative. It is just so important to give back to the community. Allison purred into the reporter's microphone, placing a manicured hand over her heart. But tonight is also incredibly special for us on a personal level. My husband DeAndre and I are thrilled to announce that we are stepping in to rescue my older sister's struggling food business. She runs a little food truck concept, and she recently expanded far too quickly. She got in completely over her head and was facing imminent bankruptcy. The reporter nodded enthusiastically, furiously scribbling notes. "That is incredibly generous of you," the reporter said. "Will your firm be absorbing the debt?" DeAndre stepped forward, taking control of the interview with his practiced corporate charm. "We consider it a family rescue mission," DeAndre stated smoothly, looking directly into the camera lens. Urban Crave has some quaint operational value, but it lacks the elite financial infrastructure required to survive in today's macroeconomic climate. My investment fund is acquiring a controlling 40% equity stake. We are injecting emergency capital to save her supply chain and preserve jobs. It is what family does. We protect our own, even when they make poor business decisions. My mother Diane could not resist inserting herself into the spotlight. She stepped up to the microphone, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "We have been so worried about Lauren." Diane added, her voice trembling with fake maternal concern. "We always tried to guide her toward a stable corporate career, but she insisted on pursuing this risky culinary path. We are just so relieved that DeAndre has the financial capacity to save her from complete ruin. Tonight, we are bringing her back into the family fold. I stood there listening to them spin their elaborate self-serving lies. They were literally parading my supposed financial destruction as a PR stunt to boost their own fraudulent reputation. They were using my manufactured desperation to mask the fact that DeAndre was running a massive Ponzi scheme and was days away from federal indictment. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They truly believed they had completely defeated me. They thought I was arriving tonight as a broken submissive woman, ready to publicly surrender my empire to save face. I took a deep breath, adjusting my emerald jacket, and stepped out from behind the ice sculpture. I walked directly onto the red carpet, my heels clicking against the pavement. The photographers immediately turned their lenses toward me, recognizing my face from the recent Forbes cover. The sudden flurry of camera flashes caught Allison's attention. She turned her triumphant smile, freezing for a fraction of a second when she saw me looking sharp, composed, and absolutely unbothered. But she quickly recovered, rushing forward with her arms outstretched, playing the role of the benevolent saving sister for the flashing cameras. "Lauren," she cried out, wrapping her arms around my shoulders in a suffocating fake embrace. "You made it! We were so worried you might be too embarrassed to show up tonight. But do not worry. DeAndre has all the paperwork ready. We are going to fix everything for you." I did not hug her back. I simply let her perform her charitable act, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. I stepped back, looking at my family. My father, Howard, gave me a stern, patronizing nod. "You are doing the right thing, Lauren," he said quietly, ensuring the press could not hear. "Just smile, sign the documents on stage, and let DeAndre handle the complicated business." I looked at DeAndre, who was smirking at me, fully believing he had successfully extorted his way out of federal prison. "The stage is set for the announcement at 9 o'clock. DeAndre whispered, leaning in close. "Do not try anything stupid. The logistics freeze is still active. You sign the equity transfer and your trucks roll tomorrow. You try to back out and you lose everything." I met his arrogant gaze, my face a mask of cool compliance. "I understand perfectly, DeAndre," I replied, my voice smooth and compliant. "I am fully prepared for the announcement tonight. I brought all the necessary paperwork right here in my bag. I am ready to finalize everything on stage in front of all your important investors." DeAndre smiled, clapping me on the shoulder with heavy, dominant force. "Good girl. Now go get a drink and try to look grateful." I nodded meekly and walked past them, entering the grand ballroom. I found a quiet spot near the back of the room, clutching my black tote bag. I watched them continue to give interviews, inflating their egos to the absolute maximum, promising their wealthy investors a massive, lucrative acquisition. They were building their pedestal higher and higher, completely unaware that I was about to kick the central pillar out from underneath them. I checked my watch. It was 8:45. In exactly 15 minutes, their entire fraudulent reality was going to violently shatter in front of the entire city. The 15 minutes passed with an agonizingly slow rhythm. I stood near the back of the grand ballroom, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching the city elite mingle and clink their crystal flutes. At exactly 9 o'clock, the ambient lighting dimmed, shifting the focus to the massive stage at the front of the room. A hush fell over the hundreds of wealthy investors, politicians, and socialites. The soft jazz music faded out, replaced by a booming, authoritative voice over the public address system, introducing the keynote speaker and the primary benefactor of the Winter Hope Charity Gala. DeAndre walked onto the stage, soaking in the thunderous applause. He adjusted his bespoke velvet tuxedo jacket and approached the sleek lucite podium. Behind him, a massive digital screen displayed the aggressive, sharp logo of his investment firm. He looked out over the sea of wealthy attendees, a man completely intoxicated by his own manufactured greatness. He raised his hands, gesturing for the crowd to quiet down, flashing that brilliant, predatory smile. "Thank you." DeAndre began, his voice echoing perfectly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you all for joining Allison and me tonight. We are humbled by your presence and your overwhelming generosity. When we look around this room, we see the true titans of industry, the visionaries who build our skyline and drive our massive macroeconomic growth. He gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward to project earnest intimacy. But tonight is not just about institutional capital or luxury real estate development. Tonight is about something much more fundamental to my corporate philosophy. Tonight is about family values. In the high-stakes world of corporate finance, it is easy to become detached. It is easy to look at balance sheets and forget the human element. But at my firm, we believe that true wealth is measured by how we protect and uplift our own. We believe in corporate salvation. We believe that those of us positioned at the apex of the market have a moral obligation to reach down and pull others up. I looked toward the front row. My parents, Howard and Diane, were sitting at the premier VIP table, right at the edge of the stage. Diane was dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, playing the role of the deeply moved matriarch to absolute perfection. Howard was nodding solemnly, his chest puffed out with pride, basking in the reflected glory of his son-in-law. Allison sat beside them, her silver sequined gown glittering under the stage lights, looking at DeAndre as if he were a conquering hero. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that DeAndre was sweating under his velvet jacket, desperately needing this PR stunt to prevent a federal indictment. DeAndre cleared his throat, shifting his tone from philosophical to strictly business. Many of you have read the recent industry coverage regarding a rapidly expanding food service brand called Urban Crave. He continued, his voice dripping with practiced condescension. It is a quaint, energetic concept, a local food truck operation that caught a lucky wave of consumer trends. But as many of the seasoned investors in this room know, rapid expansion without elite financial stewardship is a recipe for operational disaster. The supply chain complexities and capitalization requirements of a national footprint are simply too massive for a novice operator to handle alone. A murmur of agreement rippled through the ballroom. The wealthy attendees, eager to validate their own corporate superiority, nodded along with DeAndre. He was expertly painting me as a naive, overwhelmed amateur who had stumbled into a temporary stroke of luck and was now drowning in the deep end of the pool. The founder of Urban Crave happens to be my sister-in-law, Lauren. DeAndre announced, projecting a tone of benevolent pity. She had a wonderful dream, but recently, that dream collided with the harsh macroeconomic realities of vendor shortages and liquidity crises. The business was facing an imminent catastrophic collapse. But as I said earlier, we protect our own. We do not let family fail. Therefore, I am incredibly proud to announce tonight that my investment firm is executing an emergency acquisition. We are absorbing a controlling 40% equity stake in Urban Crave. We are injecting the necessary capital to stabilize her supply lines completely, restructure her operational debts, and bring her fragile brand under our elite corporate umbrella. The ballroom erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause. DeAndre smiled broadly, soaking up the validation and the false credibility he so desperately craved. He raised his hand again, signaling for quiet as he prepared for the final humiliating piece of his grand theatrical production. "We wanted to make this official right here tonight," DeAndre said, looking directly out into the crowd, scanning the faces until his eyes locked onto mine at the back of the room. "I want to invite Lauren up to the stage right now. We are going to sign the ceremonial equity transfer paperwork in front of all of you, symbolizing our new family partnership and the financial salvation of her company. Lauren, please come up and join me." The spotlight swung across the dark ballroom, blindingly bright as it found me standing alone near the back doors. The entire crowd turned in their seats, their faces a sea of wealthy curiosity and patronizing pity. The room watched me in total, breathless, and absolute silence. My parents beamed in the front row, encouraging me forward with eager, demanding gestures. I did not flinch. I did not hesitate. I gripped the thick leather handle of my black tote bag, the one containing the absolute destruction of their entire fraudulent world, and began my long, deliberate walk down the center aisle toward the brightly illuminated stage. I kept my head held high, my posture projecting pure confidence. Every single step I took echoed with the undeniable weight of impending justice. They wanted a weak, submissive victim tonight, but I was bringing them absolute total devastation. I climbed the carpeted steps to the stage. DeAndre held out his hand with a winning smile. I ignored his hand completely and stepped up to the lucite podium. I placed my black leather tote bag on the surface. DeAndre leaned in, trying to guide me toward the stack of ceremonial papers resting beside the microphone. I looked out at the sea of wealthy investors. The room was completely silent, waiting for my speech of gratitude. I took a deep breath. Thank you all for being here tonight. I began, my voice ringing out clear and steady. DeAndre paints a very compelling picture of corporate salvation. He tells a wonderful story about families stepping in to save a struggling business. But as any good investor in this room knows, you should never trust a pitch without verifying the balance sheets. DeAndre chuckled nervously, stepping closer to the microphone. Lauren is just overwhelmed by the moment, he said, trying to smoothly interrupt. Let us get this paperwork signed so we can celebrate. I did not yield the podium. I am not overwhelmed, DeAndre, I stated firmly. I am simply clarifying the terms of our arrangement for your shareholders. Because the truth is, Urban Crave is not struggling. We have zero operational debt. We have a $300 million valuation, and we are completely cash positive. A wave of confused murmurs washed through the ballroom. Howard and Diane exchanged a panicked look in the front row. Allison gripped the edge of her table, her silver sequined dress catching the harsh stage lights. DeAndre tried to grab the microphone, but I stepped into his path, blocking him effortlessly. The only reason my supply chain experienced a temporary disruption this week, I continued addressing the crowd directly, is because my brother-in-law used a shell company to execute a hostile buyout of my primary vendor. He intentionally froze my national contracts and demanded 40% of my equity to release them. He tried to extort me. The murmurs turned into loud gasps. Investors in the audience began whispering furiously to one another. DeAndre's face turned a pale ashen shade. Turn off her microphone, he hissed to the sound technician off stage. But the technician did not move. My chief operating officer, Cameron, had already secured the audiovisual booth 10 minutes prior. I looked up at the projection booth and gave Cameron a sharp, deliberate nod. Instantly, the massive digital screen behind us flickered. DeAndre investment firm logo vanished. In its place, a towering high-definition document appeared on the screen. The bold red letters at the top of the projection read, Notice of Asset Liquidation and Immediate Foreclosure. DeAndre spun around to look at the screen. He staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. You see, I announced to the captivated audience, DeAndre Investment Fund is completely insolvent. He has been running a massive fraud. He is over-leveraged by tens of millions of dollars and facing catastrophic margin calls from 3 major regional banks. He orchestrated this fake merger tonight because he desperately needed my company cash flow to hide his crimes from federal regulators. He needed my money to stay out of prison. Allison stood up from her front row seat, her voice screeching over the crowd. Turn that screen off right now. You are lying. You are just a jealous cook ruining our charity gala. I looked down at my sister, feeling absolutely no pity. I am not lying, Allison, I said coldly. I have the receipts. I reached into my black tote bag and pulled out the thick stack of legal acquisition documents. I held them up for the entire ballroom to see. I did not sign a merger agreement tonight, I declared, my voice echoing with absolute authority. Instead, I spent the last 48 hours speaking with DeAndre panicked lenders. I used my immense liquid capital to purchase his toxic debt at a steep discount. I bought all $45 million of his defaulted commercial loans. I am no longer just his sister-in-law. Legally speaking, I am his biggest creditor, and I own the exclusive rights to every single piece of collateral he pledged. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Wealthy investors were pulling out their phones, frantically texting their brokers and legal teams. DeAndre was gasping for air, clutching the edge of the podium to keep himself from collapsing onto the stage. I turned back to the massive screen, picking up a laser pointer from the podium. "Let us review the collateral schedule," I said, circling a specific line item on the projected document. "Right here we have the downtown commercial real estate project that Allison has been boasting about to the local press. The project is completely stalled and generating zero revenue. Effective immediately, I am seizing that property. Allison, your flagship development now belongs to Urban Crave. We will be bulldozing it to build our new corporate distribution center." Allison let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, as her entire luxury real estate career evaporated in front of the city elite. But I was not finished. I moved the laser pointer down to the secondary collateral schedule, and right here I continued, my voice slicing through the chaotic noise of the ballroom. "We have a residential property used to secure DeAndre's final desperate round of funding." Howard and Diane froze in the front row, the blood completely drained from my father's face. My mother clamped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. "Yes, Mom and Dad," I said, looking directly down at them. "You co-signed a fraudulent loan to help your favorite son-in-law extort my business. You pledged your sprawling suburban estate as collateral against his failing fund. I now hold the exclusive mortgage to your house. Consider this your official public notice of eviction. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property." The sheer weight of my declaration hit the room like a physical shockwave. My parents sat frozen in their VIP chairs, their mouths hanging open in absolute disbelief. The illusion of their elite suburban lifestyle shattered instantly under the harsh glare of the stage lights. But it was DeAndre who finally broke the paralyzed silence. A primal, desperate sound ripped from his throat. He lunged across the lucite podium, his hands grasping frantically for the microphone. He knocked over a crystal water pitcher, sending shattered glass across the stage, completely losing any remaining shred of his refined corporate composure. "Lauren, turn that off right now!" DeAndre bellowed, his voice cracking with sheer panic as he reached for me. He thought he could physically intimidate me into silence, just as he had tried to do in his corner office. But I was faster. I stepped smoothly to the side, letting his momentum carry him awkwardly against the edge of the podium. I reached into my pocket and pressed a single button on my smartphone, seamlessly syncing the device to the master audio board, controlled by Cameron in the projection booth. "I am not turning anything off, DeAndre," I stated, my voice projecting clearly over the ambient noise of the panicked ballroom. "In fact, I think it is time we turn the volume all the way up. I think your esteemed investors deserve to hear exactly how you conduct your high-level financial negotiations." I tapped the play icon on my screen. The massive concert-grade speakers surrounding the grand ballroom cracked to life. Instantly, the crystal-clear audio recording from my Apple Watch flooded the venue. DeAndre's own arrogant, condescending voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings, trapping him in a cage of his own making. "You are just a lucky cook. I play the real financial game." The recorded voice sneered perfectly, capturing the malicious classism he had directed at me. "I manipulate markets. I dictate the terms of survival. I engineered a market correction. I saw an overvalued, vulnerable target, and I leveraged my institutional capital to capture it." The wealthy investors in the audience gasped. Several prominent board members from local charities stood up from their tables, their faces contorted with disgust. The recording continued without mercy, laying out the exact parameters of his criminal enterprise. "Unless you sign over 40% of Urban Crave equity to my investment fund by the close of business today, I will personally guarantee that your logistics network is permanently bankrupted by tomorrow." The audio played the undeniable explicit demand for extortion. It laid bare his illegal market manipulation and his predatory tactics. Every single person in the ballroom, from the society photographers to the elite politicians, heard the undeniable proof of his staggering corruption. The absolute silence of the crowd was broken only by the damning sound of his own recorded arrogance. DeAndre stood on the stage, his chest heaving, his face slick with a cold, terrified sweat. The velvet tuxedo jacket that was supposed to be his armor now looked like a straitjacket. He frantically looked toward the exits, his eyes darting back and forth like a trapped animal. He knew the implications of that recording. He knew that the investors in the room were already dialing their legal teams, ready to strip his fund of every remaining cent. But the worst was yet to come. Right on cue, the heavy, ornate double doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding, violent crash. A dozen men and women in dark windbreakers and sharp suits marched into the venue. The bold yellow letters on their jackets read, FBI. Right beside them walked several stern-faced agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission. The flashing red and blue lights of federal tactical vehicles pulsed through the massive glass windows of the lobby, casting an eerie, frantic glow over the artificial winter wonderland. "Nobody move," a senior federal agent shouted, his voice cutting through the rising panic of the gala attendees. He raised a warrant high in the air, his eyes locking directly onto the stage. "DeAndre, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, extortion, and operating an illegal Ponzi scheme. Step away from the podium and keep your hands where we can see them." The ballroom erupted into sheer, unadulterated pandemonium. Guests scrambled out of the way, knocking over expensive floral arrangements and crystal champagne flutes as the federal agent stormed down the center aisle. DeAndre raised his trembling hands in the air, completely surrendering. Two agents flanked him, spinning him around forcefully. The harsh metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the stage as they locked his wrists behind his back. Allison let out a piercing, hysterical scream that tore through the chaos. She scrambled up the stage stairs, her silver sequined gown catching on her heels, tearing the expensive fabric. She lunged toward the agents, tears streaming down her face, her carefully constructed high society persona completely destroyed. "You cannot take him!" Allison shrieked, grasping at the sleeve of an FBI agent. "Do you know who we are? We are building a legacy. He is an investment banker. You are making a massive mistake." The agent gently but firmly pushed her away. Mom stepped back immediately, he ordered, guiding the handcuffed DeAndre down the stairs. "Your husband is facing decades in federal prison. I suggest you contact a defense attorney." Allison collapsed onto the carpeted steps of the stage, burying her face in her hands, wailing with a pathetic, broken desperation. Her entire identity, built entirely on false prestige and stolen money, had just evaporated. In the front row, Howard and Diane sat completely paralyzed. They did not move to comfort their golden child. They did not shout or demand explanations. They simply stared straight ahead, their eyes wide with absolute hollow horror. They watched their fake empire crumble in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. Their friends were recording the arrest on their phones. Flashbulbs from the press illuminated the tears streaming down my mother's face and the absolute defeat in my father's posture. They had spent their entire lives cultivating a flawless image of superiority, and it had all burned to the ground in less than 5 minutes. I stood on the stage watching the federal agents escort my brother-in-law out the double doors, and I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. The heavy, suffocating chain of seeking their approval snapped completely. I picked up my black tote bag, stepped off the stage, and walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Fast forward exactly 1 month. The fallout from the Winter Hope Charity Gala was absolute and merciless. DeAndre was currently sitting in a federal holding facility. The judge had denied him bail, designating him an extreme flight risk after discovering several hidden offshore accounts. He was facing a combined total of 45 years in federal prison for securities fraud and extortion. His elite investment firm was completely dismantled by government auditors, and the true scale of his massive Ponzi scheme dominated the local news cycle for weeks. The man who had mocked my food truck was now wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, eating cafeteria food served on a plastic tray. The sudden and complete financial devastation for the rest of my once arrogant family was equally absolute. I executed the strict foreclosure on my parents' sprawling suburban estate without a single ounce of hesitation or regret. The bank seized Allison's stalled commercial real estate development, liquidating the land to cover a fraction of the massive debt she and DeAndre had accumulated. Stripped of their stolen wealth and completely alienated from their high society friends, they had nowhere left to hide. My father Howard and my mother Diane were forced to file for personal bankruptcy. With no other options, they moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Allison, whose luxury real estate career was destroyed by the scandal, had to move into the tiny spare bedroom of that exact same apartment. The reality of their poverty hit them hard. Deprived of their country club memberships and designer clothes, they quickly resorted to doing what they had always done. They tried to manipulate me. My phone began buzzing relentlessly with pathetic, desperate text messages. Howard sent long paragraphs demanding I remember my duty to the family, claiming they were struggling to pay for basic groceries. Diane sent tearful voice memos begging for forgiveness, promising she would finally be the mother I always wanted if I just paid their rent. Allison sent erratic, angry messages oscillating between blaming me for ruining her life and pleading for a corporate job at my company. I read exactly 3 of those messages before taking decisive action. I did not reply. I did not engage in their toxic cycle of guilt and abuse. Instead, I handed the entire communication log over to Rachel, my lead corporate counsel. The next morning, a private courier delivered a heavy legal envelope to their cramped apartment. It contained a comprehensive cease and desist letter outlining a strict restraining order. The legal document explicitly forbade them from contacting me, approaching my corporate headquarters, or stepping foot within 1,000 feet of any Urban Crave location nationwide. If they violated the order, I promised to pursue maximum legal penalties. I blocked their numbers on every digital platform, erasing their toxic presence from my life permanently. They were finally gone. Today, the winter chill had melted away, replaced by the bright, warm sunshine of early spring. I stood outside on the pristine sidewalk in front of a massive, newly constructed brick building. The bold, vibrant logo of Urban Crave shone brightly against the blue sky. This was not just another restaurant. This was our flagship corporate hub and the official opening of our 150th location. A massive crowd of loyal customers, local officials, and cheering employees gathered around the entrance, holding balloons and snapping photographs. But the most important person in the crowd was right beside me. I gripped the handles of a sleek, comfortable wheelchair, looking down at Grandma Rose. She was wearing a beautiful floral dress, her white hair perfectly styled, and her eyes shining with unspeakable pride. She reached up and placed her soft, wrinkled hand over mine, giving it a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "You did it, my sweet girl," she whispered, her voice full of pure joy. "You built your empire." I smiled, feeling a genuine warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with profit margins or corporate acquisitions. I pushed Grandma Rose forward, navigating through the cheering crowd until we reached the large red ribbon stretched across the front doors. Cameron handed me a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors, grinning from ear to ear. I took the scissors, but I did not cut the ribbon alone. I guided Grandma Rose's hands, helping her hold the golden handles. Together, we sliced through the red fabric, officially opening the next massive chapter of my life. As the crowd erupted into applause, I looked around at Cameron, Rachel, David, and the hundreds of dedicated employees who had helped me build this incredible enterprise. I realized in that beautiful, triumphant moment that true family is never defined by the blood running through your veins, especially when that blood only seeks to bleed you dry. True family is defined by the people who stand by you when you have absolutely nothing. It is the people who believe in your vision when all you possess is a rusted metal truck, a small kitchen, and a massive dream. I had lost my biological family, but I had gained the entire world. Have you ever had toxic family members mock your dreams only to beg for a piece of your success later? Share your story in the comments below. The most profound lesson woven throughout this incredible journey from a struggling food truck operator to a corporate titan is that shared DNA does not entitle anyone to your peace, your success, or your future. Society constantly conditions us to believe that family must always stick together, a sentiment frequently weaponized to trap individuals in cycles of emotional abuse and financial exploitation. Lauren's family used maternal guilt and patriarchal authority as tools of manipulation, demanding absolute loyalty and financial salvation while simultaneously belittling her life's work. They viewed her not as a cherished daughter or sister, but as a disposable asset to be drained. This story teaches us the absolute necessity of establishing ironclad boundaries. For years, Lauren endured the mockery and the stolen opportunities, but her ultimate victory was deeply psychological rather than just financial. The moment she stopped seeking the conditional validation of her toxic abusers was the moment she became truly untouchable. She recognized that her worth was not defined by the artificial standards of a pretentious status-obsessed family, but by her own immense resilience. Furthermore, her triumph beautifully redefines the very concept of family. True family is not composed of the people who eagerly arrive with their hands out when you finally reach the summit. True family consists of the people who stand shoulder to shoulder with you in the trenches, believing in your vision when it is nothing more than a rusty vehicle and a dream. By unapologetically severing ties with those who sought to bleed her dry, she protected her empire and created space for genuine loyalty to thrive. Take a moment today to evaluate the boundaries in your own life and bravely step away from anyone who diminishes your light.